presentation, not long, but just like a lot of data, let's put it that way. But before we get started, we'll go ahead and just kind of kick everything off with our agenda for today. And let me see if I can get my screen going.
So sorry, Lynn. Can you
Oh,
hit record to cloud on your end and then we will start recording?
yes, I think. I thought I said okay. Did it not go through? I saw it pop up.
I don't think I didn't get your meeting is being recorded.
I got it.
Oh, you did?
Good.
Okay.
Okay,
I
great.
did.
Sorry, everybody. It's Monday. Happy Monday. Back to Lynn.
No worries. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, let's see. Can everybody see my screen? Perfect. Thank you, Director Wilkinson. So today we're gonna start off with our quick brief introductions and just remind everybody about the virtual protocols. Just if you want to ask a question, just be on screen, have your camera on. We're trying to avoid use of the chat. But if you put something in the chat, just be prepared to come off mute and ask your question. And similar format as we've had with all of our other presentations. If there's any questions that are coming up during the presentation, please just put your hand up and we'll certainly answer those questions because there's a lot of information that's going to be shared today. But before we get started, if we could do just a quick round of welcome and some brief introductions with your name and what institution you're from. And I'm going to start with the UCI team, and I see Dr. Penner on my screen. So we'll start with your team if you want to just call on people after you're done, and then we'll just kind of go through and make sure we've got get everybody accounted for.
Sounds great. Good morning, everybody. I'm Emily Penner. I'm an associate professor in the School of Education at UC Irvine. And my team and I have been working with Lynn since about 2023, I think, and with folks in ODE in various places for about a decade. And I know that I've met with a few of you or been in Zoom calls before, so it's great to see some familiar names and faces. One of our team members is in class right now. So that's Aaron Ainsworth. He's not able to join us, but I'll pass it over to Yujia Liu next.
Hi everyone, I'm Yujia Liu. Currently, I'm a postdoc at University of Missouri, and I graduated from UC Irvine, worked with Dr. Emily Penner, and I used Oregon teacher data for my dissertation and for many of the research. Glad to meet everyone.
Is there anyone else from your team, Emily? Just okay. All right. Well, we'll start off with the directors, and I have Dr. Perez is on my screen first, and then you can call on somebody else if you would, please.
So I'll take that as me.
That's you. Yes.
I'm not a doctor yet, so I'm
Oh, did
director.
I say doctor? That's so funny. Sorry. Direct.
That's
Yes.
no, it's my cue sometimes because there's a doctor present. There's just a director.
Yes, yes. It's a Monday. Remember that. That is what actually.
Well, thank you. My name is Marty Perez, and I'm the director that represents K-12 administrators for the state of Oregon. And I will go with Cara.
Thanks, Director Perez. I'm Cara. I am a research analyst at the EAC, and I will call on Director Potter.
Good morning. I'm Melissa Potter. I'm the school board representative, and I'll pass to Director Wilkinson.
Hi, good morning. I'm Diane Wilkinson. I am in the early learning slot, and I will pass it to Bill Rhodes.
Hi, I am Director Bill Rhodes. I'm the Director of Educator Preparation and Pathways Program at TSPC. And I will pass it to Dr. Mondragon.
Good morning, everyone. This is Shara Mondragon, and I also work at TSPC. It's good to see everybody. And I'm not sure who we've missed. Did we get Ryan yet?
No.
I can jump in. Thanks, Shara. I'm Ryan Clark. I'm a research analyst with ODE, and I'm the data steward for the staff position collection, which is where a lot of data we use on this report come from. So happy to help with questions today. And I'll go ahead and pass to Andy next.
Hi, I'm Andy Mill. I'm the project manager. I work for ODE, and I will pass on. Is it Director Kata?
Yes, thank you, Cotter. Director Cotter. I teach at South Eugene High School Social Studies. I'm in the high school director position, and I'll pass to Monica Weathersby.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Excellent. Monica Weathersby, EAC Director Chair with OEA.
Great. And Ashley's here as well. Ashley, you want to do a quick introduction?
Hi, everybody. My name is Ashley, and I am the administrative specialist supporting the EAC team.
Great, thank you. So we are going to, I'm just going to share a quick summary of the purpose of the report and of this work group, just so that we're all continuing to kind of keep that in the back of our minds. And then we're going to go into Dr. Penner and Dr. Liu's work and what they have to share with us. And then hopefully we might get back into the 2024 recommendations. That is one of the pieces of this work group, is to come up with some recommendations for this report, even if they'll be drafted, and that's fine. And they could even continue forward some of the recommendations that were made last time. And then from those, we'll hopefully after the next work group, we'll be able to start kind of drafting a long-term plan, because that is one of the goals for the report. This work group is contributing to the report by having each of the state agencies presenting their current data and findings to the work group and the progress on the state's goals. That is the ultimate purpose for this report, is to kind of be able to speak to how is the state doing? What is the progress that we can show on the educator equity goals? And then after reviewing all of the current data, the work group will look at those recommendations from the last report and then collaborate with the agency teams to consider recommendations for the 2026 report. One other quick note, just for all of you who were in the last work group meeting, we do have a working document that I'll put in the chat in a minute, but we're looking at making sure that we're collecting feedback on from you all, from the questions that you may have with all of the data that's been shared. And again, looking at those state goals and making some assessments about how do you feel that, or see that the progress is being made, what kinds of progress is being made on the educator equity goals, and then what concerns might you have. And then what are some also findings that you're seeing that might be something that is meaningful or promising to you? And then if there's any disparities or concerns, naming those, and then any additional information that would help clarify kind of the story that we're trying to tell around how the state is doing in its progress in meeting its educator equity goals. That's kind of the main focus that I want to make sure that we're able to capture today. And I will put the link to that note catcher in the document in a minute, but I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Penner, and let's make sure that she can share her screen, Ashley. Any questions about today or anything else while we're doing a little bit of tech back-end work? Okay.
So Lynn, there's one remaining meeting next week, isn't there, after this? That's the only other thing I can think.
Yes, there will be one more meeting afterwards. We'll talk about that, but that will be with the HEC and DELC as well. Okay, Emily, it's all you.
Sounds great. I think I succeeded in sharing and then unshared, so let me try that one more time.
Okay.
It's great to see so many, I don't know, Oregon data celebrities in one place. So you kind of said that was going to happen, but it's pretty cool to see you all together. So thanks so much for giving us the time to join this meeting, Lynn. As I mentioned, we actually have a fourth member of our team, Priyanka Agarwal, Dr. Priyanka Agarwal, who contributed to this as well. We've been trying to update what we had worked on from the 2024 Educator Equity Report. And a lot of what you'll see here are figures that look similar to that. I think we kind of see our contributions to this as giving as much of a longitudinal picture as possible, as well as trying to think about some of the different ways that educators transition between roles, and thinking about not just teachers, but everybody else who's working at schools across the state. So we will have this supplement that, like we did from 2024, we're going to focus on turnover by educator groups and some subgroups underneath those. We'll focus mostly on the whole state today. I know there was a question about regional variation. Today we'll talk about variation by urbanicity. And in a version that'll appear kind of after the main report, we also will do specific versions for each REN, which we did in 2024 as well. And probably sometime this fall, we'll do another presentation with all the REN leaders about their REN specific reports. And I can only see about 5 people at a time. So if there's a hand that's raised and questions to interrupt, please let me know, and maybe someone can flag me down, Lynn or Yujia or somebody, if I'm breezing past a question that's important for that slide. We're going to do a little bit of work on the characteristics of teachers and their schools by experience and demographics. Those are mostly in table form at this point, so we took a bunch of them out of here because it's a little less interesting to look at and to talk about. It's a lot of data all at once, but we have some of that stuff that'll be included in the main report. And then we've been trying to do a lot more digging into our a group of big interest, which are the entering teachers, especially in work we've been doing with Lynn and others at the EAC, people who are kind of making their way into teaching from other roles, as staff or as paraprofessionals or things like that. So we'll have a little bit about people who we are calling transitioning teachers coming from non-teaching positions. Though more of that will appear in the report than we have in this slide deck today, just to kind of focus on a few things. While we're going through this, we're especially eager for input from you all, just about what from this presentation resonates with you all, if there's anything that's unclear or confusing or needs more detail. If there's anything that you saw that you wanted to learn more about, and anything that we didn't include here, this is only a subset of things, of course, that you think we should add. And I can see there's a chat question. Oh, that's just the note catcher. Perfect. Okay. Okay, so we now, because of this longstanding partnership we've had with ODE and EAC, we have data going almost 20 years now, and we're up to the 2024-25 school year. And we're going to use some of the same data that you all use, and about sites and districts and assigned positions, some of the professional characteristics of these individuals, and we're going to link it to student data. We are still working on cleaning that student data. So any place that student data appears, it's only through the 2022 school year, and we're kind of borrowing forward those earlier records. But for the final report, we will update that through the 2024-25 school year for students as well. Okay, so there we go. I also want to note that relative to the report last time, there's been a few small updates from the prior report because we've had a few previously missing observations and data corrections from newer iterations of the data we've received. It doesn't change any of the findings, but there may be numbers that are slightly different between the two. Okay, so this is a lot of the kind of thing that we are looking at. We've tried to break out folks into these broad categories of teachers, administrators, paraprofessionals, licensed staff, and non-licensed staff. Last year we had, in 2024, we had the licensed staff and non-licensed staff together, and this time we've broken them apart. And in each of these figures that's under this big set of figures, there's 3 different ways that we're thinking about turnover. We're thinking about the blue group, which are the folks that leave the Oregon public school workforce altogether. You can see, for example, that teachers, when they're exiting, that's about 10% of their exits across this whole period, as opposed to paraprofessionals, it's much closer to maybe 15 or even 18% in some of the more recent years. Non-licensed staff, similarly pretty high, if not even a bit higher in recent years. Then we're thinking about the folks in gold who are switching districts. That's usually the smallest group, although administrators tend to do that more. That's kind of part of their job. They're getting hired to go lead a school somewhere else a lot of times. And then we're thinking about the green folks. These are the people who are switching schools. So they're remaining in the same district, but they're just moving schools within that district. This is especially common for also for administrators, but paraprofessionals in particular. That's a lot of the mobility that we see for them. A couple of things I also want to highlight while we have these pictures in front of us, which is first, teachers tend to have the lowest turnover of any of these four groups. That was true in the previous report, and it's still true today. The other thing I want to highlight is that almost every single group, and I should note, paraprofessionals tend to have the highest turnover of any group. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody here either. Non-licensed staff can also be pretty close to that too. Every single group had a high water mark in around the 2022 school year. And they've all now dropped back down from that high water mark in terms of turnover. So there's a sense in which we're seeing a return, if not exactly to pre-pandemic levels, to maybe some earlier levels in the mid 2010s. So I think that's actually probably pretty good news, although I'm sure there's a lot of dynamics underlying that. I'll pause for a second just to see if there's any questions. I know it's a lot of information all at once, but we also think the comparative across groups is really useful, as well as the comparative over time. But there are a lot of different ways you need to look at it. Okay, let me go now just within the teacher group in particular. There are again four figures. We have teachers who are in general education, teachers who are in special education, who broadly have higher turnover than those in general education. And do a lot more moving between schools in particular relative to their general ed peers. And then we want to especially focus on these entrant teachers. These are the teachers who are new to the workforce, have no experience before. And you can see in early periods in both general and special education, there was a lot of turnover, around the Great Recession. That's not a mystery at all. This was a group that potentially was also involved in layoffs in some of these places. And you can see there was this, if anything, is the group that is still kind of having this consistent turnover happening even in these years after the pandemic. They look a little different than the general ed teachers pool overall, where there's this drop down back to earlier patterns. Okay, great. Slides are going out to you all. I want to, before I forget, I want to note that, first of all, these are draft versions, so there may be some small updates later. Anything that you all identify that doesn't resonate or align with data that you all have is something we definitely want to hear about, so we can make sure to catch that before it goes out more broadly. Okay, so I mentioned this group of folks who are the entrant teachers. These are the ones who, have high turnover everywhere across the country, but in particular are kind of bucking the trend of returning to slightly lower levels of turnover. If anything, these folks with 0 years of experience are continuing to have really high turnover, even in this post-pandemic period, whereas everybody else has kind of returned back to some lower level of turnover, even our folks who are really more experienced teachers, and even some of the kind of middle career folks. And in particular, we see a lot of mobility across schools among this entrant group, switching districts, and of course, exit from the Oregon public school workforce altogether. The beginning teachers who are still pretty new and developing their skills are somewhat similar, but even, 10 percentage points, 12 percentage points lower, even in the current moment. And our more veteran folks, these are the folks at or near retirement. And usually when they're moving, they're switching schools within their district or exiting altogether toward retirement, of course. Okay, I'll pause again in case there's any questions.
We had one question. Director Weathersby, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. I was just going to try and see if it needed to be a note instead. But so many folks come to me and they've been pushed out, which means they've been giving a letter of directive. Your lines aren't straight. You can't control your kids in the lunchroom when you're not even there. Things that are sort of falsified. So I was wondering, is that like the reason people leave tracked?
It may be tracked in individual districts or schools, but we don't have that information, unfortunately.
Okay.
That would be very interesting to think about, as well as, the people who might get non-elect letters that come when there's budget challenges. These are not things that are in our data. We'd be happy to add them if there was a way to do that, but I unfortunately don't know the answer to your to that kind of information. Though I suspect, especially in some of these years, around the Great Recession and perhaps even more recently with budget challenges, it might not be just folks who are, getting mixed reviews. It may also be some financial components to some of these things too. That would be really useful information. I'm sorry we don't have that available for this report.
No, it just makes me, with OEA itself, to think of like, how can we gather that data? Because I think that's pretty important. Cool.
I agree.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So then we have some differences around some of the equity questions. This one is by race ethnicity. And I want to note that this multiracial group was not collected systematically in the same way prior to 2011, so that's why it starts late. And of course, we see some differences in especially in switching schools and switching districts, although the levels of turnover are slightly lower for white educators and maybe even Asian Pacific Islander educators relative to their peers. The levels of exit from the Oregon public school workforce are relatively similar. It's more this other kind of mobility that's happening for some of the other racial and ethnic groups that it kind of makes up the difference in terms of their turnover rates. We see somewhat similar patterns with this escalating turnover around the pandemic, though that's not true for the American and Indian Alaska Native. It was a little offset. I also want to note this is a very small denominator relative to the other groups, maybe not compared to Black teachers, but compared to other groups. So that also does strange things to the rates of turnover because the denominator is also kind of small. But in terms of kind of the trends among the larger racial and ethnic groups, we see this same acceleration over the pandemic that's now kind of reverting to pre-pandemic levels. So, there's still racial and ethnic differences that are notable. And I think that, is still a concern of, for policy folks who want to think about ways to continue to diversify the teacher workforce in this way. But it is good news to kind of see everybody kind of following these same patterns back toward where we were before the pandemic or before the years right after as budgets started to shift. And then I know there was a request for some geographic variability. I think what's a little bit remarkable is that there's not as many differences as you might expect in terms of turnover across these broader region levels. Exactly what what the turnover, like the overall rates are relatively similar, but the composition of that turnover is a little bit different. So in cities where there's probably a lot more opportunities to move within a district, the district is larger. So naturally there's some options there. There's much higher turnover in that way compared to say town and rural, where you have to switch districts potentially to move to another school if there's only a few schools within the district. But broadly, the turnover rates are not substantially different across these groups, perhaps slightly elevated for town, but not as different as I might have expected based on concerns about, in particular, staffing in rural areas. But I also want to note this is averaged across the whole state, so there's probably likely to be variability in certain rural regions and certain city urban regions, compared to others. So that's something that we will probably uncover in more detail if it's there in the REN reports. Okay, I think we're getting close. I know this is a lot of numbers all at once, and we'll have a summary at the end. So I want to talk about how to read these two figures because they're different than the other ones. So again, we have this progression of years from 2007. Now we go to 2025 because this is not a measure of turnover. It's now a measure of just the fraction of employees of color in a particular school year. And we're seeing across these four broad staff groups, here we've not broken staff out separately, that this trend of increasing diversity continues. We have this by staff group over here. We have it by teacher years of experience over here. And broadly, you can see consistently across years, without much interruption, all four groups are increasing in diversity. Teachers being the least diverse among these groups, administrators slightly less, and then staff and paraprofessionals are considerably have a much larger share of teachers of color. And there wasn't really much slowing on this front at all across the pandemic period. You can also see among teachers by experience, this pattern is continuing, and of course it's the younger folks who have the largest share of teachers of color. There was a little dip among these entrant teachers, the 0-year folks, but that's mostly, if we were to draw a straight line across this period, now they're kind of back on track. Mostly everybody else is kind of continuing apace, although of course our most experienced folks are the spaces where we have the smallest shares of educators of color. So this is all teachers. So all teachers of color. And in particular, this kind of middle group, I think this is 6 to 10 years. This is actually diversifying at a pretty rapid pace as well. So we're now getting folks who've got some decent experience in the classroom, who are an increasing share of those folks are educators of color. This to me is actually pretty exciting because it suggests that some of the retention efforts to get people over that 4-year-ish slump have succeeded, even in this more challenging climate, which is great. Okay, I want to see what else. Okay, we just have some summary stuff from here. So broadly, the good news is that turnover has declined from its historic peak in 2022, and it's in a more typical range for almost all groups, except for that entrant teacher group. It's higher also for some historically marginalized groups, though in most of those cases, it's a little bit down from the peak as well. We did not end up including this figure, but it's a little bit lower from teachers who are entering from other Oregon public school positions than the new to Oregon public school entrants. And that's something we're going to dig into in more detail in the report itself. We've been trying to track these folks who are making that transition either through a Grow Your Own program or through some other effort from staff and paraprofessional groups. And those folks have slightly lower turnover than the people who are just showing up for the first time with a new credential to the Oregon public school system. And the workforce, as I just mentioned on the prior slide, is continuing to diversify. Teachers are still the least diverse amongst this group. And if we add in also in a slide that we didn't show, the folks who are also linguistically diverse, that pattern still holds too. So that's a lot of information all at once. And we'll have a little bit, well, actually a lot more in the report itself. But I'll stop sharing so that I can see a few more squares, if that's okay. I'd love to take any questions or thoughts at this point.
Hi, this is Director Cotter, and I was curious, maybe particularly for Dr. Liu, since you were also doing dissertation work with this, if either of you were comparing to how other states were collecting data and what they were reporting, and how Oregon may be unique just in the data sources, and if any other states do further disaggregation of the data, such as which Alaska or Native groups educators are a part of, or which Latino Hispanic backgrounds educators are from, or if our aggregates are fairly similar.
Emily, I think I can provide some information I know from some other states like Missouri and Kansas, but I think Emily can provide more information. So since my current work is working on these two states, and my feeling is that Oregon data is more comprehensive in terms of including all these different staff groups. So we not only have teachers, but also have all these principal, licensed, and non-licensed staff and paraprofessionals, and all these different positions that are marked out. These are not shown in any of other states data set I'm working on, but I'm just familiar with Missouri and Kansas data sets, so that's one thing. And the other thing is Oregon has a very long panel since 2007. This is longer than some of other states I know. And thirdly, some of other information that can be linkable is very great. For example, link to license, link to students, and the course assignments, and a lot of the different information that we can combine together to answer our questions. This is very helpful and more comprehensive than other states I know. In terms of the race or ethnicity aggregation, I think it's similar across the states. Like people use similar racial ethnic groups to identify people. Emily, I think you can provide more information from California and other states.
Yeah. California, in terms of the statewide data, which is, for what it's worth, much less accessible at a broad level. You can get limited information very easily, but more detailed information like this is difficult to get. They also add a separate category for Filipino American, which is just a part of the California history in particular, but they don't disaggregate at the statewide level in a way that researchers and other folks who are working with the state can access into subgroups of American Indian, Alaska Native, or anything about Latinx heritage. You can, if you work with a specific district, that is something that they might have available. So I've seen that at the district level, but I have not seen it available at the whole state level. I think that's even true in some other states where they have really good long panels of data, like Texas or North Carolina or Massachusetts. I don't think they, at least statewide, provide that level of detail either. But a single district in those states might do so. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Mhm. Director Weathersby?
Thank you. That was an interesting question, Janosh. So my question is, I remember reading, and maybe this wasn't specifically in this report, but I think it was in previous reports, it said, this is why we think that these things have, like, this is why it might have gotten better, or this is why this might have been lacking. And I wonder if in this report specifically, with some of those supports taken away, if the previous reasons why we think that these things are occurring, if we will be putting in that the lack of the things that, like I think it's the Teacher Scholars, Oregon Teacher Scholars Program, Grow Your Own supports, if those things were to be taken away, that this would affect future outcomes more than likely. And so I just wanted to say, I feel like we're on a cliff right now with all the things that are being abstracted, and that this growth, I think, is occurring because we have put a lot of things in place. But if those are taken away, I sort of want to just make a warning, I guess, like, hey, this is growth, but growth can be taken away if we are cutting civil rights protections and doing all those things. So just, I'm not sure if that's part of your, what you can do, but it is something that I feel is scary.
Thanks for that comment. What we include this time is up to the current moment. And so it's still in the period where a lot of those supports are in place. So what we can do is note all of the supports that have been part of the efforts of the EAC and all of those programs. But what we can't tell yet is what happens in the space where some of those supports start to get pulled back. So we can note that we think that they're contributing here, I think. Apart from that, we don't really know what's the next step here, but I agree that there's some things that have been happening here that I think have been showing some dividends.
Yeah, and I'll just add that we definitely think there's an inference, but again, to Emily's point, we can't directly correlate those findings. And Emily and their team is going to be working with a GYO participant survey for folks who are working for advancing their careers, who are non-licensed school employees, so that we can have a better understanding. We've been trying to make this, an area of learning for our team as well as for the state, and having, about many GYO folks who have gone through a program who are licensed or non-licensed employees. We think that we can capture some of their experiences. So we won't have that for this report, but we will for the next report.
I'll also add that we've been doing some work on some earlier programs that the state had in place before that, where we can do some amount of evaluation. And some of that's still in progress. It won't be showcased in this report, but it is the kind of thing that we're also trying to investigate. So, there's been other eras of different kinds of supports in the past that some of which have had some positive impacts on different kinds of outcomes in the state before. So there's at least some encouragement that things that have been tried before have worked. But there's a lot of learning, I think, to do based on what we are, what's been in place, and hopefully this survey will give us some insights into what people think has been the most useful for them in terms of those supports.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? I think it is good to explore the extent of what this team can provide. And I'll just add a little bit of context. When we were connected with them, what we weren't able to answer in our 2022 report was where people were going. We were seeing attrition rates that we couldn't really speak to. And I think one of the things that Emily and Yujia bring to this report is to talk about if people leave the field and what does that look like. I also think it's really helpful from a historical context to note what's happening externally of other pressure points that are impacting our educator workforce. And they've been really good at identifying, like, here's what happened during the Great Recession, here's what's happening during COVID. And I think that is also mapping onto a lot of the data that we're seeing from ODE and TSPC. And I'll invite other folks to kind of jump in here. Yes, Director Potter.
Well, I jumped right in.
Yes, you did.
So here I go. And I put this in the note catcher too, and I was curious about that too for the entrants, especially who are leaving. Are they leaving and then the next year their income is higher? Or are they leaving and the next year their income is zero, which to me might indicate childcare obligations or lack of opportunities for employment. You never know what that zero compensation might reflect. But I'm trying to think of policy or efforts from the EAC or from the statewide. What do we do with that information? And we need to kind of know why it's happening. If it's childcare, we need better access to childcare that's affordable? What is that? Because we've invested so much in those entrants and they've expressed such a desire to be part of our communities as educators. What can we do to help dampen that movement? And some people get into teaching and they think, oh my, this is not my jam. And that's honest too, right? That's okay. But I predict that that's a very small percentage of the folks who are leaving. I bet there's probably, that's such a great way to use data. I bet. I wonder if there's data that shows that there's other reasons for their departure.
Thanks for that question. We've been trying to triangulate this in a couple of different ways over time. We have a project where we've been following people into their next positions in the labor market. And we've also tried to think about what happens for the folks who become parents. And what happens to their employment and earnings afterward as well. We haven't focused exclusively on the entrance in that case, but in the case of everybody who's leaving, we see a pretty large share that end up either not earning anything or earning less. A pretty small fraction end up earning similar or more, and for a lot of them, it takes a couple years for them to even get back to where they were in terms of what they were earning when they were working in their position. and this is, I think, mostly speaking about teachers specifically, we're trying to, that is not the case for the people who are paraprofessionals. The reverse is true. Paraprofessionals have, some of them are not earning that much when they're working in those positions. They're not always full time in particular. And so some of them end up taking positions elsewhere and earning more. But for teachers, because that's kind of where your question was centered, a lot of them, it takes, I don't know if I'm getting the year right, but like 7, 8, 10 years for them to recoup back to the earnings level on average of where they were when they left their teaching position in Oregon. We also see, I think your instincts about childcare could be right, though we can't completely prove that that would be the magic key that would unlock some things here. But what we do see are that folks who become parents for the first time, many of them end up exiting the public school system altogether, particularly for female educators, especially those who have a partner, a spouse in particular. Many of them end up either not returning or experiencing earnings declines relative to those who didn't end up having a kid for the first time. And so there's an interruption, and then that interruption kind of snowballs for them. And it may be that childcare could help restore some of that, return to the classroom as well as the salary they lost in the interim. But, we don't have research on that solution specifically, though it's a very intriguing possibility to help people get over that initial hump before their kids are, school age, which is, a decent part of their initial parenting phase, especially if they have multiple children after that.
Well, and sorry. Director Weathersby, I see that you have a question. Along those lines, as I'm the school board rep, so in my mind, we have declining enrollment, which means that we have open classrooms, which means that this could be an opportunity for us to leverage some, like, is there openings? Do we have actual square footage space to start offering childcare? Is there, in these moments of turbulence, is there opportunity for us to engage in a different way to actually, in the long run, better serve our communities to be able to fill some of this gap? I'll leave it at that. Director Weathersby, sorry about that.
I love it. What I heard you say, and I forgot your name, lovely. Sorry, is that the some of the folks that are we call them ESPs, are going into a higher income bracket. If that's not in education, I'm really curious to find out what that amount is so that we can bargain. Like, they're leaving us because they can get better income somewhere else. What is that income amount so that we can start trying to match it so that it is competitive and that we can retain? I mean, obviously, I would rather them get paid just as much as teachers, right? But that may not be feasible at the moment. But in the meantime, having some concrete data to say, hey, district, guess what? This is what you need to be at.
Thanks. I don't have the number handy. I will have to go back to pull that out for you, but it's definitely something that we have some work looking into. So I think that should be something we're allowed to share at this stage. If it's not, we'll get it to you as soon as we can.
Director Perez.
Well, I will just say thank you for this information. I just want to put Director Weathersby's comment back into the forefront of our discussion regarding those teachers that have exited out for X reason, and it could be in lieu of, a sanction. But I'm wondering where TSPC as an entity can come in, providing a sanctioned or an educator that has been sanctioned, or a licensure being revoked, how that can be represented in the data. That's just one way. I know that somebody had mentioned, I don't know how to get that data. I'm wondering if there's a correlation or some sort of a partnership that can be built with TSPC to find out sanctioned list and how that can be visually represented on the graphs. The other thing that I will say is I was hoping for a graph that would show paraprofessionals or staff that the attrition rate in which they are leaving the profession and also entering the teaching profession, because I think there is merit to examining those patterns to find out which of our paraprofessional or staff, when we disaggregate that data, who are finding themselves that pathway into licensure, which then leads me to my last question is really what barriers from the data and graphs that you provided are lending a visual to why teacher, and I'm going to say diversity or diversification within the teaching field, why is it lagging in comparison to administrators, which doesn't make sense to me, lagging in other kind of facets? And I'm wondering if you can provide some insights, or is there some data collection that can happen to provide insight to what's going on there?
Thanks for those questions. So yes, we are specifically looking at the folks who are moving from non-teaching positions into teaching positions. We don't have the beautiful figures to show you that history yet, but we had some very dense charts that we decided to take out, but that'll be available. And we, in the last couple of weeks, we've been trying to triangulate between the people, trying to manage how to think about experience for those folks, because some of them come to the table with lots of experience in those other roles, but haven't been a teacher before. So that's one of the reasons we didn't show it to you today, because we're still trying to think about how to classify those folks in terms of what experience they do have as they're becoming teachers. But we are seeing an increase in that transition. I'm forgetting exactly what the number is off the top of my head. Yuja, if it comes to you, or if you have that and you can open it from our notes page, we could pull that up in a minute, but we can also just share it later. Another thing I want to say about the administrators in particular, so that includes both principals and assistant principals. And it's that assistant principal group is actually what's driving the diversity of the administrator group as a whole. That is a space where I think there's been a bunch of success in including racially, ethnically, linguistically diverse folks in leadership roles. And I think that's driving a lot of the pattern that we're seeing. Why teachers are still not getting to that level is, it's probably a bunch of different other dynamics at work. I think those are also folks who are leading schools or co-leading schools in urban areas where the educator workforce is probably more diverse on average and looks a little bit more similar to the administrator workforce in terms of diversity. So this statewide variability issue, I think, is still some of what's coming up in terms of why teachers are not as diverse as some of the other folks working at schools. And I think that's coming from parts of the state that don't have the same level of diversity in the community and among the teaching force, who then convert to becoming assistant principals and eventually principals. Does that make sense? Did I muddy the waters or help kind of clarify a little bit?
I would say you provide a little bit of clarity. Part of, I guess, my time being here, I love that you disaggregated even the admin role. They're distinguishing the difference between principals and assistant principals. So thank you, assistant principals, for diversifying that demographic. I also know that admin, you could have a district office
Yes.
license versus a building. And I'm just making very educated assumptions. Like that admin figure being higher than teachers shocked me. And I'm wondering if there needs to be more disaggregated approach to representing that in a meaningful way. Because as a brown person in rural Oregon, it's lonely. And
Yeah.
that data doesn't reflect my loneliness that I feel. So
I appreciate you sharing that. And I'm sorry about that experience. Well, so a thing we could do, maybe not in the main report, but in the supplement that we provide that folks can have access to. We do a short version that's just a few pages, that's very high level, but we do a longer version. We could make an admin specific report that disaggregates further for the folks who are at school sites versus the ones who are in district offices and those and ESD offices and things like that. But we might need to go even a step further and think about some geographic variation across the state as well. I think we could do something like that. It's not like there's so many groups among the administrator group that we couldn't make a couple panels like that. That would be a great add. Thanks for that suggestion.
How big a factor do you believe the N plays in those percentages between administrators and teachers? Might be harder to move the dial in that
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, there's lots more teachers, right? That's a very big group, although the staff group is huge too. That's pretty similarly sized to the teacher group. So it plays a role, and all the efforts of different recruitment strategies and new educator and mid-career support strategies, those all play a role here. But it does take a lot of effort to move the needle because it's a big group. Yeah.
Any other questions for the UCI team?
I also realized I didn't respond to Director Perez's initial suggestion, which was, could we connect with folks at the TSPC to get information about folks who've had some kind of sanctioning about their license or something like that. I would love to make that connection if folks at TSPC are open to it. If there's some kind of reason we can't do that, then let me know. But if we could, that would be, I think, important information to add. And at least, maybe not for this report, but at least moving forward.
I wouldn't necessarily speak for all my colleagues at TSP.
Exactly.
But certainly can share that, that notion that there might be some connection. That particular set of data has its own variation, within that whole source.
Right. I imagine there's some differences in reporting of how those records work across districts or over time or both. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good conversation for the next report for sure, and figuring out how can we get a little bit more understanding. I think that's one of the iterations that we've been trying to do with this report anyway, is to understand what's happening with the trends that we're seeing, and how can we really kind of align and triangulate the data better so that we understand what's happening. So I encourage you to write that question down, Director Perez, in the notes, so we can add that to our next conversation that we have after the report's concluded. Are there any other questions that Dr. Penner and Dr. Liu can answer while we're here? We just have a couple more minutes. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to close this off in a minute, but I just wanted to kind of put it out there that we're going to send you all some materials with the draft of the slide deck. And just again, to remember, all of these documents that we're sharing are drafts, as the agencies and the UCI team are continuing to just make sure that the data is as high as quality as possible, that will be included in the report. And I'm also going to encourage you to keep thinking about what are you hearing and seeing from the data, in order to think about what are some of the recommendations that you're looking at that you would like to, kind of consider. There's four big areas that we're trying to kind of really keep it narrow to. But again, there's also things that if, again, we haven't been able to collect some of the data to give a report on the progress, you're certainly able to kind of move some of those recommendations forward to 2028. which is wild to think about. But yes, we could certainly add that into that collection, and then we can really get all of the data agency teams as well as the UCI team to kind of figure out, can we make sure that we can report on this information? Because I think that's what we're hearing from all of you, and we want to make sure that we can capture that information. So we will send out some materials your way either at the end of today or early tomorrow. And then next week, we will have the HEC present to talk through their data, especially on their trends of what they're seeing in the post-secondary institutions. And then we'll also hear from DELC, who is our invited participant in this report, new to this report, and they're going to talk through their workforce findings for that 0 to 5 work group or workforce. So more to come. We'll be sharing some of those materials ahead of time as well. If you're not getting some of the materials that we are sending out, and we didn't send any last week, trying to give you all a break from having to look at everything, just please let us know. I know it's a lot of information to process, but we want to make sure that you have access to all of that information. And if we'll hang out if there's any other questions, but if not, there's another 2 minutes back to your day if you need it. And we appreciate you all being here today.
Thank you very much for all your work.
Thanks for having us, everybody.
Thanks for
Great.
being here.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, Ashley, I think you can end our recording, or do I need to do that?
I think that you need to do that.
Oh, okay. Thanks.